There are mixed reactions over the slight increase of the national minimum wage from 28 Rand 79 cents to 30 Rand 33 cents per hour as from next month. While Union Federation COSATU cautiously welcomes the increase, SAFTU says it's not nearly enough to address the ever-rising cost of living. Now, for more reaction, we're joined by COSATU's Matthew Parks, as well as SAFTU's Zwelinzima Vavi. Good to have you both, and thank you very much for your time. Matthew, let me start with you. The fact that you are cautiously accepting this little increase, is that an indication of COSATU no longer maybe holding a similar view with other labor unions around this stigma of a poverty wage, or has that sentiment shifted?
Well, I'm not sure about the adjectives. I think what we are sure about is that we, as COSATU, represent the majority of unionized workers. We actively participate in the discussions about the increase for the minimum wage each year in the Commission, and of course in the engagements when it makes the recommendations. And these are not easy negotiations to achieve, like all wage negotiations across all sectors and industries and for all unions and all federations. But I think what we're appreciative of, number one, is that we have an inflation plus increase, so a 5% increase. Inflation currently is about 3.5%. Is it enough to be a living wage? No, of course not. Is it enough to address the real pain that workers feel because of the rising cost of living? No, it isn't. But is it a step forward? Yes, it is. I think to simply say we reject it, well, it's easy to reject everything. It's easy not to participate, but I think we have to do the realities of going to the negotiating table, going and engaging and achieving these increases. It's also useful to take a step back and say the minimum wage has come into effect in 2019. At that stage, it was 15 Rand for domestic workers. It's now 30 Rand and 23 cents. So that's a doubling, 100% increase for domestic workers in 6 years. For farm workers who are pegged at 18 Rand, it's a 66% increase. And for the overall minimum wage, which is at 20 Rand, then it's now 30 Rand, that's a 50% increase. So those are positive, substantial increases. But of course, there's not enough to do with the rising cost of living, like electricity, transport, food, and other costs, which hit working class families the hardest. Yeah. If you look at the debt reports, it's a scary picture. The one point which we're very unhappy with, and we're going to continue to push government around, which is outside of the ambit of the Minimum Wage Commission, is for the expanded public works and community works program workers who remain pegged at 55%. We think this is unacceptable. It's wrong for government to tell the private sector, you must comply with the minimum wage, which of course, yes, they must, and then to exempt themselves for these workers, because the EPWP and CWP workers face the same rising cost of living. They face the same levels of poverty. They struggle to pay for electricity, for food, etc. And there's no moral justification to say for them, we can't find the money. Yeah. If it has to be phased in over a year or 2 years, like we phase in domestic and farm workers, so be it. But we can't see any moral justification 6 years down the road for EPWP and CWP workers to remain pegged on. So for us, that's a huge moral failure. But overall, with the minimum wage increase in the past 6 years, we think there's been substantial improvements. Is it far enough? No. But we must continue to push for these increases and beyond.
So you've already mentioned the fact that there is, of course, a vast difference between cost of living and inflation-linked increases. So who do you need to engage as far as that is concerned to say, well, these increases cannot just only be linked to inflation because, as you put it, it negates, of course, the administered prices such as electricity, fuel, transport, and so on and so forth. So where does that lobbying need to happen?
Yeah, so it's a multiple set of intervention we have to do. A minimum wage is the level below which no one must be paid legally. We have to campaign for a living wage, which is at least double that of a minimum wage. Minimum wage takes you to about 5,300 Rand a month, roughly, depending on how many hours you work and so on. A living wage, which in itself is still in poverty, takes you to about 9,500 Rand. So we have to keep pushing to achieving that. But also, as unions, we have a responsibility to organize workers, to recruit workers. And the reality is about 70% of workers, the majority of whom are the vulnerable workers who are affected by the minimum wage. We need to do better to unionize them across federations, across unions. We need to go and put in place collective bargaining institutions, agreements to improve their wages, because the minimum wage and government can do so much. But we also have a responsibility as unions to say, what are we doing to go and organize these workers? We also have to address some of the administrative prices as well, like electricity. So we've had engagements as Labour this past week with the presidency, with cabinet. We've got to do more to ease the burden on Eskom. to make sure the municipal debt to Eskom is tackled so that the price of electricity can become affordable for the economy, but also for working class families. It also means we have got to make sure that indigent households are registered for the free electricity and actually do receive it, because many of them no longer receive it. Similarly, with regards to the free water allocations, we've got to do more to reinforce the social wage, from subsidized public transport and housing to basic and tertiary education, to the social grant, the SOD grant, etc. We've got to adjust the SOD grant to raise it to the food poverty line, because in the past 5 years, it's only once been adjusted for inflation. So there's a variety of interventions we've got to put in place to overall uplift people from poverty. But the fundamental solution also is about growing the economy, taking it from the 1% growth rate, which has been stuck at for 2 decades, to at least 3% plus, where you will begin to see unemployment falling. We've got to deal decisively with our number one crisis, the national ticking time bomb of a 42% unemployment rate. Because whatever we're doing here, the minimum wage and all of that, those are all important things. But if each worker is supporting about 7 relatives who are unemployed, there's no amount of massaging we can do on that front. We've got to do the fundamental issues of growing the economy, reducing poverty and inequality. But to think that minimum wage is going to resolve all of those, no, it's not physically possible. But yes, it's got an important role. And yes, we must continue to push for further above inflation increases. And of course, fundamentally, we've got to grow the economy and expand the social net as well.
Yeah. The Sam is saying, well, good and well that COSATU thinks, well, 5%, at least it's something coming on. It's not where we need to be. There are fundamental things that we need to address. But there's weak enforcement even of this minimum wage. There are some who are saying there is widespread non-compliance that is being noticed.
No, and that's 100% true. And that's one of the most difficult things. We have, I think all of us agree, we'll leave aside some in business, but in the labor front, all of us agree we've got progressive labor laws. These are workers' hard-won rights fought for many, many decades. There's a real challenge about enforcement. We find that in certain vulnerable sectors, be it in agriculture, the employers of domestic workers, the construction sites, the restaurants, the hospitality, the fuel station, the transport, the security guards, etc. Many of the rights, not just minimum wage, the right to overtime pay, to paid leave, the right to work at a safe condition. We saw those workers who died in George and Balito in the construction accidents. Those sectors of the economy have largely checked out of our labor law regime. So there's a need collectively to do much more to enforce the labor laws. There's a need to make sure we have more labor inspectors. So government has agreed to increase the number of labor inspectors, which is woefully inadequate, at about 2,000, to hire an additional 10,000 last year and a further 10,000 this year through the presidential stimulus, employment stimulus. That can make a substantial increase. But there's a need to have more labor inspections of high-risk sectors and to do so jointly with organized labor so we can deal with decisively with employees who break the law. Government also amended their public procurement laws recently to say that any company doing business with the state has to have a compliance certificate from the Department of Labor that they're in compliance with minimum wage, with Employment Equity Act and so forth. Those have got to be enforced. And until you begin to wield a stick plus a carrot to employers, then we're going to continue to see widespread abuses. But also, as organized labor, we have got to do much more as well, because we largely organize about a quarter of the workforce in certain sectors, mining and so on, clothing and so forth. We've got to do much more to organize those vulnerable workers who are predominantly the 1.2 million farm workers, the 1 million plus domestic workers, the construction workers, etc. Because those are where you find the real abuses taking place. But we have huge challenges, but I think we must also not dismiss the huge gains we managed to achieve in the past 32 years of democracy, even before that. And we must use those successes to build upon further engagements and further interventions to see how to really make sure these fruits of these hard-won labor rights are enjoyed by all workers.
Matthew, appreciate your time as always. Thanks so much for coming on. Matthew Parks there. Speaking on behalf of COSATU, they are cautiously welcoming this recent increase. Several other unions, including SAFTU, of course, have rejected this framework and its 2026 adjustment. We're joined for that by Zwelinzima Vavi. Vavi? Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming on. Yeah, COSATU says, look, it's not where we need to be, but it was not easy negotiations. It's easy to sit on the sidelines and not participate in these difficult negotiations and then just reject everything. It's a bigger move than what you make it out to be. If you look at where we were in 2019, from 15 Rand, 6 years later, we are now at 30 Rand in 2026. It's more than a 50% jump. If you look at farm workers, it's a 66% jump. If you look at other incomes, it's a 50% jump. So celebrate what you have been able to achieve so far.
Let me clarify one thing, that SAFTU, like all other progressive formations in South Africa, will obviously welcome the national minimum wage as a principle, because the national minimum wage is an important victory for workers, in particular the vulnerable workers who do not have a power of their own to bargain with their employers in a manner that they can bring into an equation a different power relationships. So the national minimum wage is welcome, and there should be no confusion about that. From the beginning, we've always made a distinction between the principle of the national minimum wage and the rands and cents where the national minimum wage is tagged in South Africa. From the beginning, we defined the national minimum wage when it was introduced as not different from the other wages that we refer to as slave wages in South Africa. A pattern of suppressing the wages whilst allowing the companies and big politicians' salaries to continue to shoot in the roof in a manner that increases wage income inequalities in our economy. We have become the most unequal society in the world, and the national minimum wage at the rates that it is at now does not help us close that gap.
Yeah. So
that's the first criticism.
So while we are still on that, I mean, then would you share that sentiment to say, well, while we are fighting for more on the minimum wage side, but the fundamental issues that really we should be dealing with are issues that have to do with the poverty alleviation, deal with the high prices of electricity, deal with the social wage issues, deal with SRD grant, but even more, grow the economy and deal with a bigger issue of youth unemployment rate, which is quite high, which would be better than looking at minimum wage as a silver bullet that is going to assist us.
Thank you very much for raising all of the points. Exactly the point that we are making. The current economic model, the current growth path that we are finding ourselves in, the current neoliberal programs of the government, now combined with austerity, put us exactly in a situation where the gap between the rich and the poor continues to rise. Even if you are in the national minimum wage, it makes no difference whatsoever in terms of addressing one of the biggest political, economic, and social crises we face, which is that of inequality. The second point that you are raising correctly is that the national minimum wage at its current price does not in any way address the crisis of poverty in our economy. Let's look at the figures. With the current increase of 5%, the national minimum wage will rise to about 5,900 rands a month. And yet, when you look at what is the cost of living in South Africa, you will realize, firstly, that that amount of money is exactly what you need to buy food for the family of 4 or 5 in your household. It will not help you get any resources for transport, not for medical health care, not for school fees if you are not part of the free school and all of that. It won't help you to buy clothing. It won't buy you to help you buy electricity or buy water. All of that, when they combine, they make the cost of living way off above the 5,900 rands. So that's our second criticism. We will continue to make this point, and I know that, and I can see that our colleagues are irritated every time we raise this very point, but they can't counter the argument that 5,000 to 6,000 is the amount you need today to buy food, and that does not include all these others. In South Africa, studies show that most workers spend 60% of their salaries on transport and food only. 60%. No electricity, no health, no nothing else. Just food and transport takes 60% of our wages. Now that's even in the normal economy, where now we have these thousands and millions, 6 million people plus, who are receiving this 5,000 to 6,000 national minimum wage. It means that those people are living below the upper bound poverty level, and which is a disaster for an economy. It's worse off when we talk about the extended public works program workers who are getting a 16 rands an hour. Yeah. And these are the people who are proving to be the backbone of providing services in the context where government, through its austerity program, is cutting the head count of municipal workers, and we are now in a situation where these EPWP are doing jobs that were yesterday being done by full-time municipal workers. Government is resisting and rejecting all the calls we are making that the EPWP workers must all be absorbed, to be permanent, to be employed, as municipal workers where they are doing a job at the municipal level, not this continuous exploitation where they are given a 16
Well, that raises the other issue which is then being raised. Say the reason why, for example, you are failing to get government to listen to you is partly because you as Labour have not done your work to organize at least 70% of workers so that you strengthen these collective bargaining institutions. So there is some spade work that you yourself need to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ideally, we should have organized farm workers so that it is not only 5% of them who are in the unions and therefore needing the interventions of government, such as the introduction of the national minimum wage. If they had power, if 90% of them were in the unions, they would be struggling for a living wage, inspired by the Marikana workers who got shot at and killed by the ruling party today in collaboration with the bourgeoisie or the capital that was exploiting them. So yes, that's a very important point. That point cut across all of the labor federations. I hear that my colleagues is very eager to show that they are the biggest federation in the country. Yes, they are the biggest federation organizing public sector workers. They do not have a significant presence in the manufacturing, where in the farm, and even in the domestic, where workers are sitting in the cold front of exploitation. It is SAFTU that is organizing largely the biggest manufacturing unions who are exploited by the system of capitalism. And so we don't want to boast about that as if that is a life and death issue for workers. The issue needs that we should be talking about is how do we strengthen the base? How do we organize the unorganized? How do you unite the trade union federations so that they don't get divided by political parties, and as well as the deployments, which some people are working very hard to get in the next elections, including their eagerness to sacrifice the basic interest of workers because they have one eye in the deployment committee that must elevate them into parliament and into cabinet positions. So we must unite workers into the federation and eventually coordinate our affairs such that we can have a confederation and that we can realize the claim of one country, one federation in our lifetime.
Zwelinzima, Vavi, appreciate your time as always. Thanks for coming on. SAFTU General Secretary there, Zwelinzima, Vavi.